There's a whole part of being witnessed with our voice because we're literally sharing our energy through the field. Everything is so much is contained in the voice.
Here to share that this is an amazing opportunity to share the musical prowess of Dr. Shamini Jain. Here is her song, Galactic, and we wanted to share it because she was so kind to allow us to, as the intro to her episode on the Compromise to Alchemize podcast. You can check out her work on her website, where she lists all the places you can find her music and all the rest.
Greetings and welcome to the Compromised to Alchemize podcast with me, your host, Dr. Neil Bolchandani. I have the great pleasure of interviewing thought leaders, artists, healers, people of all kinds on this podcast. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Shamini Jain. She is extraordinary. Her reputation precedes her. I'm very, very excited to share her with you, my audience. Those of you who know her and are wondering who I am, hi, it's nice to meet you. And you already know how amazing she is, extraordinary her work is, how many have called her an influence in a great way, and it includes me. So let me introduce her, though, for those of you who may be coming across her for the first time or may just not know the vast areas that she has explored for many years. So she's an international keynote speaker and self-healing teacher. She integrates her expertise in clinical psychology, psychoneuroimmunology, her PhD is in that, Eastern contemplative practices, and vocal empowerment to teach others how they can best heal themselves and live joyful, fulfilling lives. You're going to hear about how significant joy is in her life. So, and if you've come across her work, you've known that she's done some extraordinary work. I've said that word 3 times, extraordinary. 4. Okay, I'm going to keep going. She's got award-winning research and, authorship in this field, psychoneuroimmunology, which she's one that we can say is an expert in that and has been for quite some time. Also, we could say Biofield Science. That's also something she is not only part of, as her work with clinical psychology, psychoneuroimmunology, and other things that she's doing in the field of healing, but she's put together an initiative. I'm going to talk about that here. She's written a 2-time award-winning book called Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health. She defines Biofield in the podcast, so you've got to listen. She's taught at conferences, corporations, and she's led even at retreat centers like Esalen, the Sivananda Ashram, and Omega Institute. She's also taught extensively online at Chi, which I'm about to explain what that is, Shift Network and Humanities Team. She's got an album, I've listened to it. It's called Kali Yuga Blues. So she's a great singer, and so, check that out on all the platforms. It's under Shamini. And she's a founder of and board member of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, cleverly, which is Chi. And that's the international collaborative of scientists, healing practitioners, educators, and artists who lead humanity to heal ourselves. She also serves as an adjunct professor at UC San Diego's Department of Family Medicine, where she supports research and education within UCSD Centers for Integrative Health. She is a delight. She is, like I said, many would call her a mentor. She has colleagues, peers, and mentors in a broad array that also it's really amazing to see how that work has influenced her. But she's working alongside, or at least in an online form, with Bruce Lipton, who the book Biology of Belief, and his work was really influential for me too. Back when I started chiropractic college in 2005, he came to speak to us, Palmer College of Chiropractic, Davenport, Iowa. It's also something where on this on this precipice here of magical May, as I call this month for me for many reasons, and my birthday is this month too. But I, I let Shamini know that I have been a fan of the field of psychoneuroimmunology for as long as I can remember, meaning like the beginning of chiropractic college. And so for nearly 17 years, I've written that word out many times, but I've also written a suffix, including musicology, psychoneuroimmunomusicology, because of my uh, love of sound. She has got a passion for sound, for singing. She's got many data collections, practitioners who have so many studies where she's showing um, through the work that some of her people are doing, but also through research she's collected on sound healing. And so it's really cool because like I enjoy that someone has made it a purpose to codify this, collect it, and validate it. And that's like, I'm going to say it for the fifth time, extraordinary. So I don't want to say too much because I want to make sure that you all tune in, enjoy. But I'm really, really excited because if you saw last week's episode, I shared on psychoneuroimmunomusicology, my experience with that, my work within that, my work within neuroacoustics. And I will thank those like Shamini for paving the way, for being the ones who have led it, who have created a wave so that I could, ride that wave. I know what she loves things like singing, surfing, family. So riding that wave of amazing innovators, pioneers, and researchers like herself and creatives have done. I am fortunate to come into that field, the biofield as well, and I talk a little bit about my new position on the faculty of the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology, and with Meredith Oak, who started that, with Nico Kennedy, who directs it, and who, because of them, I'm now able to provide the work that I'm doing and the people who are coming to get trained to a place where data is being collected. But it is really, really an honor and a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Shamini Jain, and really excited to see what you think and how this episode reaches you. Okay, I am here with Dr. Shamini Jain and really enjoyed the few minutes we've had to talk and just get to know each other some. I've been appreciating you through uh, the work that you shared. I'm on your website, but I mean, some of the podcasts that I've heard you on, where you go deep in explaining like your work, and I've listened to your music, and that's been fun. So very multifaceted, quite a lot to like unpack. So thanks for being here with me, and I'm just like really excited to see where our conversation goes.
Oh, thanks, Neil. This will be fun.
Yeah. So I just to kind of paint the picture too is that I'm in Santa Barbara. Go to LA like yesterday, almost weekly, maybe sometimes twice a week to do sessions, manual therapy for people. So there's always a lot of excitement. I actually was at this live podcast at a hotel and seeing iconic figures where it was this melding of consciousness and music. And for me, I feel like those are two of my deepest passions to talk about, explore. And I just want to frame up. You've been involved in both, and yeah, just for those who, we're gonna have links to some of your prior episodes, but I came across the phrase psychoneuroimmunology, the word, the field, many, many, many years ago, at the outset of chiropractic college education. And I
Mm.
wrote down that word many times, and I actually wrote another kind of related word. So it's a field that I've loved and studied for a long time, and you are one of those who have been somebody that has mentored others or taught others. So you're one of those that we can look to as somebody who's heralded that. Can you
Well, those crazy people who got my PhD.
That's right.
By the
That
way, they say if you can say psychoneuroimmunology 7 times without breathing, you get your degree.
Yes.
No, it's, yeah, it's really it's quite a mouthful, but it's such a self-explanatory term, really. Psyche, not psycho, it's not about
Yeah,
being
totally.
though we do study how crazy affects the body. I'm just kidding, kind of. Psyche, which means spirit, right? But most people in the West equate with mind. So
Mhm.
psyche for the psycho part of it, neuro, which is the brain, the spinal cord, the central nervous system, and immunology. And as you probably well know, Neil, there is a companion, psychoneuroendocrinology.
Yes.
And if you want to get really crazy, you just say PNIE, because
Uh-huh.
nobody wants to say psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology. And
Mhm.
like, here's the point, really, right? These are just ways of uncovering the connection between mind and body, between spirit, mind, and body. And honestly, as you know, one of my big passions, the biofield, what is that? We'll talk about that. But
Mhm.
the energetic dimensions, right? And really, what these terms are pointing to is just a reunification of all these different aspects of ourselves. And even one of the founders of psychoneuroimmunology, Bob Ader, was fond of saying these are all disciplinary boundaries. He said these disciplinary boundaries are mere fictions. We put things in boxes, right? The immune system, the hormone system, but it's an interconnected web, and it
Mhm.
really depends on the level of scale that you're looking at when you're looking at the homeodynamic functioning of a living organism, right? The
Mhm.
way we heal ourselves, really. So
Yeah.
psychoneuroimmunology is amazing because 60 years ago, people said, "Oh, I think the emotions affect our biology and they might influence disease progression." Lots of practitioners were saying this, right? Chinese medicine practitioners, psychologists, even medical doctors in the West, and nobody believed them until this field was really borne out by really careful research and continued transdisciplinary
Mhm.
investigation where, biologists, neuroscientists were getting together with doctors, immunologists and endocrinologists were getting together with, practitioners to kind of uncover this mystery of the mind body connection, which they all sensed was real, but didn't really have a handle on scientifically. And now look, I mean, we've got brain gut communication that, is teaching us so much about the progression of disease and how to manage and prevent progression of disease, how we modify lifestyle, how we modify our thinking, how we even tap into the divine. I'll go straight there and say, all of these factors, our spiritual life, our interpersonal life, our relationship with our environment, what we eat, like it's really wonderful because this field has showed us how much power we have in our own healing and that truly we are our own best healers. And all the
Yeah.
practitioners that we meet and the practitioners, I know many people listening to this are practitioners yourself. And so this, you're guiding the patient toward their own healing capability. And
Yeah.
psychoneuroimmunology is a part of that for sure.
Yeah, and I love that, and I also have a lot of people who are just tuning in because they're creatives or their parents, their moms, they have babies or kids, or they're just looking for inspiration, looking for you know suffering and struggling, like compromise to alchemy, to gold, to transfiguring, to becoming something. And I think sometimes it can feel complicated and overwhelming, but I love how you distill things. And it's like we all have this inborn ability, this homeostasis, this divine spark of healing that we can find and access. And sometimes we need the help of other people. We need practitioners. But I love how we all have it within us, that if we can just learn keys and, you know, explore consciousness, we might stumble across some of the greatest healing we'll ever find, and it's within. But I do, yes, love how we, I'm somebody who's just journeyed with people for many years. In fact, I forgot to mention to you earlier that at our lyceum, fancy word for homecoming for chiropractic college, Davenport, Iowa, back first when I first started it, which was in 2005, Bruce Lipton came to speak to us,
Oh,
and it was so cool because I met, like this guy was talking about biology of belief and epigenetics, and then he's talking about grounding, getting negative ions and those electrons, and I'm like, I'm in the right place here because
indeed.
I grew up. My dad is a cardiologist, and he grew up in India. And so we grew up in the medical model. I love and respect it, but I also saw how I felt so not in the presence of things that would unlock my own ability to heal. He is really appreciating what I'm doing now. But so when I got around Bruce and some of these guys, I'm like, wow, they're showing us what is possible. So then now, fast. So actually, the other thing I didn't mention to you is that this was, yeah, so whenever that was, 17 years ago, I began writing the word down of psychoneuroimmunology, but I started to write down psychoneuroimmunomusicology because of my history in sound, music, the study of music, and I love the field of acoustic, psychoneurobiology. But I've been writing down the word psychoneuroimmunomusicology, and I've had now many years of putting forth studies in this field that I've been part of, and I just love it. So the other part that I want to talk to you about is when I
Mhm.
taught intuitive movement around the world, and I taught in Singapore, New Zealand, Australia back in 2017. I was in this room with 60 people in Singapore, guiding them through unlocking their intuition. And I realized in a moment they are so nervous to be far apart from one another because they had a big room, and I said, "You spread out." But their Singapore is tall, but it's very
Mhm.
squished, and
Oh,
people
interesting.
move like that. They move close to each other with no space. So if you ask them to have their own kinesphere, their own sphere of movement around them, they looked at each other very nervously, and I said, "Put your arms out." They You could see the tight fascia from the shoulder girdle, but it
Wow.
wasn't type fascia, it was their lack of the feeling of feeling safe to emotionally, just be vulnerable. So, I was like, "Okay, Neil, whatever you had in mind that you were gonna teach at the outset, you need to go back to helping them feel safe to be further apart from one another." And
Well,
so for the
how
first
beautiful that
hour,
they
we
felt
worked on
safe
that.
together, they felt
Yeah.
safe together. I mean, this is collectivist culture right here is, yeah, and it's amazing to think of how the built environment shapes our field, right? Literally
Yeah.
shapes our field. So in some ways, maybe their energy was more dense and a bit,
Mhm.
contracted in that it's close to their body. And so the idea of expanding one's own field, you can think about this even on the psychological level where we, in the West, we have such individualized culture. It's all about me. It's about how I show up in the world, how my authenticity, things like that. But in collectivist culture, it's about the we, it's
Mhm.
about like, what do you mean you want us apart? Like we're together, we're an organism, and so maybe there's a dance,
Yeah.
between those things for people, for
Yeah.
sure. What an
I love
interesting experience.
it was a good dance because when I asked them to be further apart too quickly, it wasn't good for them. Yet when they remained too close and they weren't expressing facially and they were afraid to sound out, I said, "Okay, how about we go a little further apart?" And then they got way more confident in their bodies. So it was like a dance to find, I'm just here to facilitate something, and I honored their culture, and I honored their I it would have been foolish for me not to, because here I am, a person from somewhere else coming in to their land, being asked to come in, being asked to teach them, and in that moment, their culture taught me way more than I could have taught them, and so I really feel, um,
Yeah, well, let's talk
there's an
about that for
excitement.
a moment because,
I wanna hear
there's
your
actually
insight on that. I love your
science
insight.
all of this. It's not just Singaporean culture, but so many indigenous cultures that knew that when we come together in shared field, especially around singing and dancing, there is a synchronization that takes place. And this has actually been borne out in data in what's often called hyperscanning studies. Don't ask me why they call it hyperscanning, but
Mm,
where they measure simultaneously, EEG or EKG between people. And what they found is that when we come together in shared singing, our fields can actually synchronize. Not
mhm,
only that, but there are these studies, I'm reminded by one at University of California, San Francisco that was published years ago on Kirtan Kriya chanting. And these were people who had never chanted before, it wasn't even their culture or whatever. And they compared it to listening to music and they saw this profound improvement in health for people who came together and learned this type of singing together and to some degree separately, where their markers of cell aging greatly improved. The telomerase activity in their bodies greatly shifted. So we see this often across cultures where there is a reason why I believe that we come together in shared practice, whether it's meditation or singing together, where, yes, I think part of that, as you alluded to, is feeling more safe, but we're also kind of creating a larger container.
Mhm.
And, this is not so scientific, but my sense of it from the spiritual level is that when we do that, we are opening the field more greater for spirit to really come
Mhm.
in and help guide as well. And certainly this is the case in ceremony, right? First Nations cultures and other cultures where we do rituals, we sing, we stomp on the earth together. We're not stomping on the earth, we're actually giving energy to the earth. We're bringing energy in and we're opening to spirit. And there is literally a field shift and a field synchronization that is measurable, that is happening. And yet, as you say, and I think you alluded to, and I notice this too in the work that I do with my students, because I teach a lot of vocal empowerment work because of it's similar to you, I suppose. What a powerful effect it's had on me. The human voice is an incredible healing instrument.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's true, most of us are shut down with our own voice. We feel uncomfortable to sing, sometimes speak in front of others. It feels more comfortable to sing together than it does to sing and be witnessed. There's a
Mm.
whole part of being witnessed with our voice because we're literally sharing our energy through the field. Everything is so much is contained in the voice, you know? There are even, there are even people that have for years been looking at the frequencies in the human voice to detect what might be missing and how it might reflect our state of health. And it's a vulnerable thing to share our voice, especially in these times. A lot of people feel shut down and they want to share their voice. I mean, that's why I think the work you're doing is so important. I'm really excited about some of the work I'm doing this year. I'm doing specific teaching on this actually at Omega and Shivananda Ashram in the fall on your powerful voice and the links of voice with energy, which I think a lot of us haven't been taught. How powerful your voice is as an instrument to feel, amplify, and harmonize your energy.
Mm.
It's really amazing.
Mhm. Oh, I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for yeah, bringing what you're bringing well to the world into our conversation. I have some questions. In a moment, I would love to hear a little bit more about what you are doing coming up. I just think it'd be really amazing as a way to unveil more of like what you possess within like that knowledge for yourself as a singer, but also as one who is helping others. And I have worked. I mean, well, I have worked. For 17 years in this field. And it wasn't until almost 9 years ago, my daughter was born with a tongue tie. Our midwife said, "Your daughter has a tongue tie." It was creating a lot of issues for her and my wife with feeding, pain for both of them.
Mm.
And so I quickly said, "Oh my gosh, what is that?" And then I started to work with her body, as I have always done, working on the visceral system, the organs, the muscles, the fascia, gentle joints, and thankfully, I found some really amazing practitioners to help me, and we ended up, getting a tongue tie release from a pediatric dentist that was revolutionary. But in the like several months after that, I began to explore how could I help support by freeing up her mouth in these different areas. That's what led to me being, a person who has not only learned but then now been teaching a lot of healers on how to navigate the floor of the mouth and ways that it could be easier. And but that and the vocal cords and the hyoid, the throat bone, I love helping people unlock those areas, and I spend most of my days that I'm in sessions just helping people free from all these physical restrictions. But inevitably, we're going to find in the biofield work, which I also want you to talk about, we're going to find those things where I'll hear a clue and I'll hear like, something like, in the invisible, the whispers. I'll hear something that happened when they were 5 or whatever it is. And the uttering aloud of that reality will sometimes create a release of the tissues. That's why the floor of the mouth and the tongue loosens for this person versus any body work that I might do. But
What happened
so
with your daughter, by the way? What happened with your daughter? You had mentioned she had a
Yeah,
tongue.
so the pediatric dentist did use a laser, a carbon dioxide laser, which is like a cutting edge laser that removed the tongue tie, and that allowed her tongue to move really freely. And then I did the post op body work and care, and and it helped extraordinarily. It was a night and day difference, not only for the feeding, she could latch and breastfeed both for her and my wife without pain. But it also meant that like a lot of the fascial visceral restrictions in her body needed way less work from me. So I went from doing like 3 hours of body work for her every day
Mm,
to like one, and then it got easier and easier. Then I, navigated the same in different ways with my kids, and then now one of my roles is the floor, the expert of the floor of the mouth in terms of how to help people with these issues, and
that's
so
great.
now I've worked with many of these people.
You actually on your techniques is amazing.
Well, that's why I don't want to go. I said a lot to say, but before any of that, sound and singing unshackled me from a life where I felt afraid to talk. And when I finally sang and joined a musical and was part of a barbershop quartet for a while, I kind of came out from my shell. So it transformed my life. And now
Mm.
um, I feel like that's really what I love to do and help people with also a lot of singers, performers, and people who just want to sing. But yeah, I said too much. I really want to get back to you, and I want to get back to like tell us what you're doing and how you explore and how you teach and how you help people. I would love for people to get a sense of that.
Well, it's a great question because sometimes it can be confusing for people because, like everyone, really, I wear a lot of hats, but my passion is really empowering people to connect with their divine life force. That's the way I would say it. It's probably not a very good marketing way to say it, but this has really been the guiding force of my life. As you said, like the legend, my legend. For me, it's always come back to this mystery and the joy of my own energy. And, perhaps like you, sound was a big part of that for me because as a kid, I found that when I was singing, I felt this aliveness, this vibration, this coming home to myself. But it was really energetic, it was
Mm.
vibrational. And so I was like, what is that? And, coming from the East Indian background, which I know we share, I started digging into my books and Jainism and other books trying to figure out what do we know about this, right? And so we come across these universal principles. The world is sound. Nada Brahma, in our traditions, but in other traditions, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Well, what is that about, this vibration? So I really set off to try to figure that out, and I ended up exploring it through the lens of science, through neuroscience, psychoneuroimmunology, and found myself in this area of biofield science because while I was studying sound and vibration, reading books by some of the greats, in the Western world, like John Bolio and Jonathan Goldman and so many other sound healers, exploring sound healing and saying there's something about this vibrational nature of sound that is so powerful, but it's beyond just the audible sound. What is that vibration? And then I had my first Reiki session, and I talk about this in my book. It's like the light just went on. I was like, oh, this is vibration. So my whole life has really been in service to understanding what this vibration is, how it plays a role in healing, how it can help patients, and more than anything, the awe and the joy that we uncover when we encounter it for ourselves. And so one of my biggest joys in my teaching, whether it's like a scientific keynote where I'm sharing the data behind things like energy healing, from a psychoneuroimmunology lens, like what is energy healing? Is it real? What's the evidence behind it? What does it mean? What does it mean for our healing? Or if I'm teaching people how to connect with their own voice, or how we might access energy that's even beyond our conditioned nature through connection with the divine feminine. I enjoy teaching on all those things, but for me, they all serve the same purpose, which is to reconnect us with our life force, to enhance our vitality, enhance our joy, enhance our sense of connection. I mean, I think if the biggest thing that inspires me about this work is recognizing that when we look at these energy fields and we experience them, whether we're looking at the science or we're experiencing this in our bodies through sound and other energy healing practices that are time honored, pranayam, life force extension, tai chi, qigong, that experience leads us to understanding this deep interconnection that we have with everything, that we're not separate from this. The biofield teaches us that we truly are all part of the same fabric of the universe. We're expressions of the divine in different forms, and the field connects us. And the science is like amazing. Some of the discoveries that are taking place in the scientific world are amazing. And yeah, I feel really privileged to have shared a lot of this in different ways. I have a couple of TEDx talks, and Tammy Simon, it sounds true, was actually the one who encouraged me to write a book. It
Mhm.
was really, I guess
Okay.
that book was commissioned by her. I wasn't even
Wow.
thinking of a book, to be frank. I was getting
Yeah.
ready to do a podcast just like this, like, "Oh my god, the podcast is with Tammy Simon, the founder of Sounds True. I should have prepared," all the things. And, we sit down and she's like, "Shamini, I have 2 questions for you. Where is your book? And can Sounds True have a crack at publishing it?" And I said, "Well, Tammy, I didn't think about writing a book, right? My dad told me to write one, like, he's been trying to get me to write one forever, but why are you saying this?" And she said, "Because somebody's gotta put these pieces together."
Mhm.
You've had the privilege of doing your own randomized controlled trials on energy healing. You have a great scientific pedigree. And there are a lot of people that still think energy healing is woo-woo. And I really want to dispel that myth. And I think you're the person to really put this together. Plus, you have this framing from the ancient traditions. So that's what the book is. It's called Healing
Mhm.
Ourselves, Biofield Science, and the Future of Health. And in that book, it's there are 3 parts to it. It's sort of like, what is energy? What is its relationship with consciousness? How did the ancient traditions understand this? And how do modern traditions understand it? So the first part is sort of like putting together the ancient and modern philosophies of consciousness and energy and its relevance to healing. And then the second part is really the evidence. And that's where I've got, over 600 peer reviewed published references of scientific papers on things like mind body energy approaches, Tai Chi, Qigong, meditation, pranayam, energy healing. How do we understand the mechanisms of these things? What does the data actually say? And how do we use that? So, the third part is really the healing keys, which is how do we put that into action? So, here's where I kind of drew from the expertise of my clinical psychology background, as well as the years of study that I've had with leading healing teachers, um, who've really taught me so much about energy. And of course, the East Indian heritage that I have in meditation and mantra and other practices to say, okay, here are the actionable steps of how we connect with energy and work with energy for our own healing. So that was, writing a book was a really fantastic journey. It wasn't one that I had expected to do, but I'm really grateful that I was able to serve in that way. And so now a lot of what I do too is the speaking and teaching. Also do work with our nonprofit that I founded 10 years ago called the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, or CHI for short,
Yeah, I
which is
love that.
really, yeah, it's a wonderful community. We have like gatherings, donation-based gatherings every month. Historically, they've also been free, where we interview leading lights on the field in energy science, energy healing practices, again, to make this really practical and actionable, and also help people hear from the horse's mouth, like some of the most cutting edge research that's going on. What are healing practices that we can do now to up level our vitality and, keep our mental health strong in really crazy times. And so it's just a wonderful, wonderful community. We have a documentary coming out on the subject of energy healing that interviews some of the top researchers across universities, including Harvard, UC San Diego, and others. Also, indigenous healers who are part of that conversation and needed part of that conversation. And the real stars, there are a lot of notables, of people that are in the film that people might know.
Mhm.
Bruce Lipton, as you mentioned, one, Greg Braden, many others. Um, but the real stars of that film, it's called The Energy That Heals, is the name of the film.
Mhm.
It'll be coming out this year. I think it's going to launch on PBS this year, but we'll also be launching it more publicly. The Energy That Heals. The real stars are the patients.
Mm.
We interviewed so many amazing patients about their journey and their experience with energy healing, and what it did for them, what it kind of
Mhm.
brought to them. Like, one of them I remember really clearly, a fellow Ted who's in our documentary, and you can see actually a little bit of him in our trailer. If people go to theenergythatheals.com, you'll see the trailer for the film and see everybody who's in it. He said, this energy healing opened a door to realms that and ways of being that I didn't even know were possible. And so this is what I love about this, because it's not just about going to see a practitioner. A practitioner will open the door for you. A practitioner
Mhm.
will help to harmonize your field. But once you open, your connection with energy, it's lifelong for you, and you can deepen your connection with this energy at any time through so many self-healing practices. And it's just such a it's been a hidden dimension of our human experience, I think, for too long, quite frankly. And I see us all now on this road to empowerment. We're all seeking that. We all know that we don't want to give our power away anymore.
Mhm.
People are always trying to take power, but if you look at the definition of what power actually is, the actual definition, whether you look at it in physics or you look at it from, ancient perspectives, it's energy.
Yeah.
Power is actually the energy to carry out something. And ancient traditions knew it as the energy that tied everything together. So once we open the door to our own experience of energy, we take back our power, really. And that's what I'm excited to help do in my service. And, just in one way, so many of us leading people back to our energy as a way of coming back into our own power, really.
Hmm. Ah, so potent. Whew, what you shared, and yeah, I mean the breadth of what you've done, the compendium of all of your teachings, this the from writing the book to your initiative, wow, and oh, there's so much good that you shared. So really huge respect to what you've done. I've referenced you, and as one of these people who has brought so much. Of this together in a crystallized, tangible way with studies to really give credence to how powerful our ability is to heal and lend healing. Quite a historic feat, and I know it's ongoing. What you're doing, the work that you keep putting forth, so it's really powerful.
Yeah, it's
Um,
really and we do research too. I forgot to mention, we're just wrapping up a randomized controlled
mhm,
trial on sound healing for anxiety.
yes,
That was
yes,
my initial background, scientist, and I still
yeah,
conduct research that way. So it's been really fun to explore how sound is such a
mhm,
powerful healing tool. Whether we're exploring it with the voice, or in this case, we were looking at a practice where practitioners use tuning forks to feel and sense the field and kind of
mhm,
harmonize the field. There's a practice of Tibetan singing bowls, and it's really fun and exciting to see how the science is advancing in this
yeah,
field. I just saw an article on my dear friend Neil Teese, that's in the New York Times this week on the body-wide interstitium. By the way,
mhm,
Neil published that research 8 years ago in 2018.
mm,
The New York
wow,
Times just now caught up with it.
wow,
Right, just shows you that sort of whole bench to bedside gap is really huge, but um, it's just another way that we're discovering in science how energy, I mean, this is, forecasting, right? I'm forecasting a little bit. There's a lot of research to get to where we're going to go with this, but
mhm,
New York Times is basically talking about the body-wide interstitium as this third circulatory type pathway that might help us understand how acupuncture works and how
mhm,
medicine and our understanding of meridians, which we call nadis, as you know, in the Ayurvedic tradition.
mhm,
This wasn't crazy like a lot of the way the colonialist, materialist, medical
mhm,
system has made it sound, right? They always sort of disowned and poo-pooed
yeah.
indigenous wisdom.
Mhm,
Now we're discovering through science more of how to look at the body, not as a machine, but as an interconnected system. And the
mhm,
interstitium is a huge part of that. So I'm going to predict that in the next 5 years, we're going to be looking at changes in the interstitium and the fascia even more deeply now as a way to
mhm,
understand some of these mechanical healing practices, understand this beautiful connection with the immune system and what we call energy, the biofield,
mhm,
understand some of these energetic healing practices. Um, because there's just, in addition to some of these findings with the interstitium, there are these groundbreaking findings that have been coming out of MD Anderson now for the past 5 years, which most people don't know about, but they should. And one day, hopefully, the New York Times will pick it up. Uh,
mhm,
but this data that has been coming out of MD Anderson Cancer Center has now shown in several different models of cancer with cells and with animals, where they looked at, lung cancer. Now, the most recent studies are with pancreatic cancer with energy healers, that energy healing can reduce the spread of cancer in these models,
mhm,
including pancreatic cancer, which is, as you know, we're all seeking, solutions to prevent that spread of cancer there. but also lung cancer and others. And these are very carefully controlled, rigorous replications, internal review boards, external review boards that reviewed all these protocols, the data, reviewed everything before even submitting for publication. So when I say these research studies have undergone the utmost level of rigor, please know that that's true. And it's showing how energy is getting under the skin and facilitating changes down to changes in inflammatory cytokines, changes in cells that drive cancer spread, changes in voltage gradients across cell membranes, essentially how cells are talking to each other electrically to prevent the spread of cancer in animals. Where ostensibly there's no placebo effect, which is a whole other discussion. I talk
Mm,
about placebo a lot in my book. I don't know if you want to
mhm,
go there. But, it's so I take all this in amid everything that's going on in the world where we have leadership that's so contracted, that's so forced with, like, this sense of separation, greed, I, me, mine, delusion, you name it, like, it's just awful, right? To, like, kind of look at
mhm,
the world leaders on the stage right now and, the undercovering of the underbelly of some of the most nefarious and psychotic people that are unfortunately wielding too much power, as we've seen in the Epstein files, right?
mhm,
And that can be really devastating for most of us, right? To just witness that and be like, "What is humanity coming to?"
mhm,
But then you see these studies with healers. You see these discoveries of interconnection in the body. You see how consciousness can literally promote healing down to the cellular level, and it gives me so much hope for our potential.
mhm,
And I think the more that we can turn our lens to what healers have been saying and doing, to what our contemplative traditions have been saying and doing, to more of the indigenous wisdom that has always been present, that has understand how we work as an interconnected system, right? We just have to give our power to those places now.
mhm. Yeah, it is, and it is. This is, yeah. It's like the lifelines through what you're saying are really pivotal because you're a great example of somebody who has stood the test of time, and there's a lot that could be crushing, compressing us, and it is some people, and there's a lot going on in the world that we collectively need to come together to thwart evil and the negative forces so that nobody needs to suffer. But I love that you are compiling ongoing these studies that show the extraordinary ability of what happens when we gather or, you know, collect these amazing resources what the healers are putting out there. So yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for that. It is profound. Almost too simple now, but no, I would love it if you would explain just for those who might be like tracking fully, and then you can always go check this out, people, go look it up. But could you define biofield for those who might still be wondering about that?
Sure, yes, because it's kind of a jargony term, right? It's like biofield? What the hell is
Yeah.
that? So
Yeah.
it is it is a term that was coined by a bunch of scientists at the National Institutes of Health in the 90s because they got together to try to figure out how patients were getting better from things like acupuncture and energy healing. And then there are these devices like laser therapy and sound healing. And like, what do these all have in common? So
Hmm.
they came up with this scientific term called biofield, a massless field, not necessarily electromagnetic, that guides the homeodynamic functioning of a living organism. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Fields of energy and information that guide our health. And so it's sort of an umbrella term because you can look at biofields in many different ways. You can look at electrical communication between cells. That's part of the biofield. You
Hmm.
can look at biophoton emission from people. That's part of the biofield. But
Hmm.
so is subtle energy, so is chi, right? So are these
Yeah.
fields that healers have tapped into. That's part of the biofield too. It's just that they aren't always easily measurable. There are some studies that have actually tried to look at emanations from healers from their hands or their heart. So there are a few of those studies, but I have been using this term for a while because, first of all, I grew up with it, right? As a
Hmm.
student and as an investigator, it was sort of a scientific term that scientists were using to try to explain these fields of energy and information and kind of grok them. What's their potency? Like, how do they affect people? How does energy healing work? So we've been using this term. And it's useful, in that regard as an umbrella term, but there's just a lot to it. There's a lot to explore. It's a whole field. And in that way, it's kind of like psychoneuroimmunology, you
Mhm.
know, because we have all these different ways of looking at the biofield for healing. And honestly, I think biofield in some ways is the extension, natural extension of psychoneuroimmunology, where now we're looking at a potential field explanation for why is it that I feel better when I hang out with people who love me? Why is it
Mhm.
that I feel better when I'm out in nature and hanging out with the trees? Like there's a field effect that's taking place. Why is it that I feel drained around certain negative people? There's a field effect taking place. And so we're looking at a different level of granularity and, understanding the reality of us being vibrational beings. And again,
Mhm.
as I said earlier, what's the payoff of that? Like, who cares? Why does it matter whether we're vibrational beings? Well, because we can shift our vibration in an instant, first of all. And when we understand that the field is the sole governing part of the particle, right? That it's the field that actually generates changes in matter. As we begin to uncover that, it amplifies our power. We're not just this bag of bone and chemicals. With our consciousness, and connecting with the field, we can drive our biology for healing and we can up level the healing of others through these field effects. And that's why I think it's so exciting.
Yeah. Well, this is yeah. So it is really I think the word resplendent is what comes to me.
Mhm.
It's just a beautiful thing to like consider how much we and how much we can harness. It reminds me of I know it's been a while. You told me it's been a while since you've read The Alchemist, and I pick it up. I carry it with me wherever I go travel. It's always in my bag right over there. So I don't often read the whole thing in one sitting anymore. I'll pick it up, open to a page, and just gaze at words and almost just pan out and just be with the book and the words and the presence of it. But when I read it through cover to cover several times, oh, it's a beautiful journey of Santiago, the shepherd who pursues his dream, ends up in a desert, ends up on this caravan, and he ends up, um, you know, being mentored by an alchemist and finds the love of his life. And he finds his. I'm sorry, I spoiled it for anybody who hasn't read it. Right? It's the. I mean, you know, by now, everybody, if you haven't read it, read it. But you know what? For me, it wasn't even the reading of the book. It was meditating on some of the words that really walloped me with the beauty of there's this point where Santiago follows the beckoning of the alchemist. They have to prove to this battalion in the desert that he can harness the wind and he can speak to the hand that wrote it all. A really cool reference to God, I feel. Um, and he just follows the flow and he does it. And anyways, he he ends up realizing how much he has within him because he talks to the wind, he talks to the sun. It's the elements and it's this beautiful tapestry, but there's another phrase. So I'm going to ask you this question. I love asking people and I really want people to know this because you could think about what is your personal legend is the question I'm going to ask you. What is your dream? What is your purpose? What were you put on this planet to do, Shamini? And people might be like, whoa, there's so much you could say right now. And if you've heard her on other podcasts, Shamini has shared her purpose, but I'm asking you it anew. And I'm going to say that the phrase that I really love in this book is when this mystical king says to Santiago, is Santiago's roaming through this town, and he says, "The universe conspires in your favor when you are in
Mhm.
pursuit of your personal legend." So, I'd
Ooh,
love for you to
yes.
share with us that answer.
It's wow, how beautiful. Yeah, how beautiful. It's interesting. These days, it really feels like it's the purpose is to share joy and share love. It's really that simple. It's not
Yeah.
and I tell my kids this sometimes, because. It's so easy for us to think our purpose is out there and it's something we do or even something we create, and it's not.
Mhm.
Your purpose is just who you are, it's your purpose is just your essence that you choose to share, with others in your seva, in your way of sharing, and so and when I'm at my best, I'd say that, I have this, ebullient joy for
Mhm.
life, you know,
Mhm.
and the energy, like, it's contagious as it can be for anyone, and we all know what that feels like. We're, in a concert with one of our favorite artists, and we're all singing together, or we just feel that, resonant joy of being in the mountains or the ocean or wherever we feel that connection and peace, and, yeah, I think a lot of us might be coming into that shared purpose of
Mhm.
sharing love and sharing joy. But I'd
Mhm.
say what comes through me more these days is probably joy, and I'm working on more of the unconditional beaming of love. That
Mhm.
typically comes out in teaching context because something else comes in and really, guides that whole process, to be frank. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that's it. And what my wish is in through my work is that I bring people back to the joy of being alive,
Mhm.
through the connection with energy, because I think that's really needed medicine for our times.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, it's so thankful for that
Yeah, joy
explanation.
I'll just say one more thing about this.
Yeah, please do.
Joy is not a bypass. Some people might be like, "Oh my god, like, our human rights are being taken away. How can you
Mhm.
talk oh, let's all be joyful," Like, so I
Yeah,
just wanna explain this a little bit.
sure. Yeah, please do.
Joy is a part of our fundamental nature.
Mhm.
In the Vedic tradition, sometimes we describe your essential eternal nature as Satchit Anand, right? Purity, pure consciousness, pure truth, and pure bliss.
Mhm.
Anand is bliss. Joy is a pathway to experiencing the bliss of who you are. And
Mhm.
it is medicine because it is so potent and such a strong power that it can guide you through the difficult times so you're not bypassing.
Mhm.
Into those moments of joy allows you to get grounded enough to fight wrongs when they're wrong. So no one's saying we don't fight. No one's saying we don't, use fire when we need to set a boundary, to take action, right? That is absolutely important to speak truth. That is important. And so that we don't burn out, so that we don't get exhausted, so that we don't get depressed, it is equally important for us to return to joy so that we can be fulfilled and that we can lead with the love that we want to see in the world.
Mhm.
And I just want to make that really clear, because sometimes we may feel selfish to
Mhm.
pursue our joy, and everything is in balance, right? If you're just off pursuing joy and you're neglecting family responsibilities or other responsibilities, it may not be a great balance for you, right?
Yeah.
But if you're neglecting your joy, like if you're 100% like not in service to anything that brings you pleasure, brings you happiness, brings you connection, um, then you're only going to be so effective in your dharam or your purpose.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, this is good. I think it's really important because it can feel just like what you're saying at the beginning, and yet when you dive in with the way you're talking about it, it's such a bounty, and it's such a resource, and it's such a joy is profound. And I love like all the different synonyms or emanations or expressions you used of it. Bliss is an important word for me. There's a scripture. It's like, you will be led forth by peace. You will go out with, you know, go out with joy and be led forth by peace. But I always, and then there's another one. Well, actually, that joy is such a guiding principle. Some people say you follow your joy, but it is true. It's like when you see the joy on someone's face when you're there with them fully present, you see the joy of a baby, we see the joy of a mom, see the joy of the world. The radiance you feel is unmistakable. And that is a gift. And then also the bliss. Uh, Years after I figured out the floor of the mouth and the tongue and how like that came through downloads. It didn't come through working on my daughter and tactically figuring things out. It came through my daughter being my teacher, intuition being a good teacher to me, and then the downloads that directed my body kinesthetically that later I would go back and look at what I did and I'd say, "Oh yeah, I released the right kidney, and that led to the mouth loosening. It was me being guided and witnessing, and then charting what I saw my body do. And
Mm, cool.
then so I know that I was led, and I couldn't have conceived of that on my own. My intellect couldn't have figured that out. Well, later, years later, I looked and I stumbled across the Kakari Mudra, um, yogic tradition of the tongue, elevating to work on the soft palate all the way up the nasopharynx. And there were even mystics in the yogic tradition who, if the tongue couldn't do it, they would use a razor, and there was guidance on how to release their own freedom. I don't advise this to anybody.
Ooh,
I'm not saying
wow.
that, but
Yeah.
they would call that moment where the tongue could access the greater state of mobility of the nasopharynx the spacewalking seal, because the seal is the mudra, but the spacewalk is the amritsar, the bliss, the state of
Mm,
bliss one would get to. I was experiencing that in my own personal movement times. And then years later, I read that and I thought, wow, this
yeah.
is me realizing this was in the fabric of my DNA through my heritage, and all
Oh,
I
I
simply
so read
did
this, yeah.
was just captured it, and I'm presenting it, but I pay obeisance to, or I pay homage to my heritage, because the cosmic sciences figured this out way before
And
I
and
did.
and and you learned it by experience. You know, I had a
Yeah.
very similar experience with this
Mm.
in a different pathway, but very related to you, and it was
Mhm.
me sitting in healing class with one of my healing teachers who's a grandmother of healing. Her name is Reverend Rosalind Briere. She's amazing, and,
Mm.
I've learned so much from her about energy and how energy works. But I'm literally sitting in class, and I feel this energetic pathway light up in me. And I
Mhm.
raised my hand and I said, "Rosalind, is there some kind of connection that you're aware of between the sacral chakra, you know, the Swajisthana chakra as we describe it, and the tongue?" And she said, and I said, "Particularly the tip of the tongue." And she said, "I'm not aware of it." And I was like, "Huh," because I feel this, right? It
Mhm.
was such a palpable thing for me, this connection with the tongue and the sacral. And so, like a researcher, I started being like, somebody's got to have this is not random. Like this is too strong to be random. And I uncovered, you know, one of the main nadis in the body, Saraswati
Mhm.
nadi, is in fact connecting this. And in some of the Kundalini texts that are out there, there's also an understanding that this nadi not only goes from the sacral or our pleasure point, Swadhisthana chakra, one's own abode, the seat of your creativity, to the tongue and the expression, as some who do may know Saraswati, she's the goddess of wisdom. She's the goddess of audible sound. She's the goddess of music. No doubt we're talking about her today in this podcast. Um, so she is the goddess of the expression, but she's also the goddess of wisdom. So in some traditions, they say that this nadi continues up the body, right,
Mhm.
toward the head, where we receive the nectar of wisdom and the bliss that comes with it. And
Mhm.
so, like you know, I became aware of this energetic pathway. And I think it speaks, you know, both of our stories here speak to hopefully what our listeners are gleaning, which is that, yes, you can go and learn from people, but you're going to have your own experiences. And, you know, maybe like us, you can allow yourself again to play and enjoy and observe your experiences with energy. And then, you know, consult a trusted teacher, consult some text to, you know, just sort of uncover these discoveries for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. Okay. Yeah, so much there to explore. People can look up all these things, and there's so much resource there. And I have a map that I created because that I found with those who have tongue tie, narrow maxillae, palate changes, things that happen in the pharyngeal arch formation phase of 4 or 5 weeks gestation. I go deep into the weeds of embryology. So I put forth some work, and it's going into textbooks on the embryology relating to um, tongue tie and these issues. And then my map has the 70 areas in the body that, when there is floor of mouth tension or any of these issues, there are 70 areas in the body that are directly impacted: organs, muscle, fascia, and bones. And but then I've distilled it down to four main areas so that it's not so overwhelming. But anyways, that is like the work I feel is that it helps codify and make it simple, But, the end goal is what I tell people. It's like, that's all fine and good. And we need maps to help us navigate. But really, truly, we all have the map within us. And intuitively, many people have uh, found these keys. And I say to people, if you find these keys, you keep playing them. You don't need to know the science. You don't need to know all the dance moves. Just find the state of bliss. And if you go there and that feels great, there because you don't need to know. But this is kind of a cool, not cool. I was just bragging on myself because I was about to give you a little segue to my next question. But for those who need dance steps, no, I mean, people are like, hey, Neil, ask Shamani this question. Those who've been faithfully following my podcast, my second question. And it is your personal legend. You shared it. Step two is, what is your personal legend in terms of a legend on a map where it's this key, like the bottom right hand corner or wherever it is, where it shows you where the trees are, or an inch on the map is like 10 miles. And so it's your symbolic key, your map, your practices. What are the ways that you stay tuned in to what it is your legend is, the joy that you talk about and the teachings you do and all those things? What is your map, or what is your legend? How do you stay tuned in? What are those things that really guide you? And then, perhaps others can glean from this as well.
I'm really glad you didn't ask me for my career map because I never had one. That's the truth.
Yeah, you
Never
can predict that one.
You're just doing what you're doing, and I'm like, "I have no idea." Just showed up, you know? Truly. So my map, especially these days with, soon to be facing an empty nest, having
Oh,
children,
yeah.
the
Okay,
one
yeah.
in college and the other going to college, and
Wow.
elders, parents, who are at a very tender age. What's lighting up on my map for me these days a lot is, family care,
Mm,
and the opportunity to serve, a set of parents who have truly loved me
mm,
unconditionally and give back to them. So,
mm,
and understanding that as part of my life's path and my soul development of what seva, and selfless service with love and devotion can look like, even within a family context, which, it's like all the stuff comes up, right? No matter how amazing your parents have been, there's always like family drama, family dynamics, all of those things. So I see that as part of my map that's lighting up. Um, but the main part of my map, I've kind of alluded to too. There are certain parts of my map where I fill myself with the joy of being alive, and so singing is a big part of that for me.
mm,
So I have different music projects that I'm involved in, including kind of active bands. One such project is called Rock Goddess,
mhm,
which I started about 8 years ago in San Diego. But really, the vision here is to have chapters all over the world,
mm,
and we have an active chapter here now on the East Coast that I'm involved in, and that's a lot of fun. So that's both a kind of a service and an internal joy part of the map. The other part of the map that is essential for me is the connection with the divine, and the way that I do that these days is through some formal practice, including mantra practice to divine feminine embodiments, through writing my second book, which
mm,
will very much illuminate some of this, in terms of the connections with the divine feminine and the graces. I teach on this too. I have some programs coming up on this called the Graces of Healing and the Graces of Power. So being a scribe,
mm,
to them, and kind of learning from them, and so that's
hmm,
sort of a personally fulfilling journey where I get to explore and do research and connect and translate as best as I can, to be at
mhm,
service to that. And, yeah, those are, like, 3 really big main parts, and then to continue to be a steward, really, of the nonprofit Consciousness and Healing Initiative, now as a board member, happily kind of taking a back seat from the
mm.
day-to-day busy work of being an executive director, so I'm graduating, and
Oh,
I'm really, really happy about that, yeah, because it leaves a little bit more time for some of these more writing and creative and family service aspects of my life that are needing attention now.
thank you so much for sharing that. That is, yeah, I feel it when you said the word scribe. I know part of it is I was taking in like, ooh, that really, I've felt that I was a scribe. And then, but I really, yeah, like sinking into how you said that is like truly you are a scribe and you are, etching into the manifested realm to a visible form these words that carry such tools, keys, and resource for people. And so, do you know yet the title of your book, or are you still
I
feeling
do,
that?
but I'm not supposed to say anything yet till, it's actually a
Okay.
sold thing, so, but
Yeah.
it will be very similar to some of the programs that I'm teaching now, which
Mhm.
are on the graces of healing
Okay.
and the graces of power.
Mhm.
And really what those programs are about, I have an online one coming up with Theosophical Society, I think in
Mm.
September, and then I have an in-person one at Shivananda Ashram, I think in the Bahamas, a beautiful place to be.
Wow. Okay.
I'm honored to teach there in November. And those are really connecting with divine feminine embodiments. In those particular programs, I speak and teach more from the Vedic and Tantric depictions of the divine feminine and
Mhm.
the relationship with wisdom, with power, with creativity, with abundance. But the book will be broader than that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm really excited, and thank you for sharing that. And I was in the Bahamas. I was in Nassau in November for work, and oh my, I was actually voice recording chapters of the two books that are coming out through me that'll
Great.
find their way into the world here in the next year. But I couldn't have had a better muse than those waters to be there for that. So yeah, and any other things that people can do? I know we're gonna have all the links that you've shared,
Yeah.
so people can go to those. But for those listening, or anything else that you want to share of how can people, tune into what you're doing, learn from you, or partake in any of the things that might be speaking to them?
Well, we spoke a lot about sound and the power of the voice, and we alluded to our friend Bruce Lipton. And I want to invite people, to just take the journey in exploring some of this. If you're new to science and spirituality, I have a great dialogue with Bruce that we recently did on being a conscious creator, in
Mhm.
a very fractured world. What does that mean? How does the science support us? What are some practices we can do? So that's part of a free gift offer that I have. And I also have a free gift on a grounding with sound practice, which is both video and audio, so that you can just be guided a little bit into meeting the power of your own voice. So, yeah, totally, invite you to explore those free gifts. And hopefully, Neil, we can put a link to them on your show notes page.
Mhm.
It's just shaminijan.com, / free gift, I think will take you there. Yeah, just Google my name and, see the different things that are kind of offered there, and feel free to be in touch. And yeah, and come join some gatherings that we have, whether here with me or with the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, our nonprofit.
Yeah. Oh, I've been such a fan, and I am even more now. And yes, Jain is how spell your last Shamini, Shamini, for those of you who want to Google that. But you'll get it all in my show notes, and um, really thankful, Shamini, for your time and your sharing, and the place from which you share. So it's been a treat. I reluctantly am concluding our podcast time together, knowing that I'd love to talk with you more, but I really want, for those of you who are listening and watching, or somebody needs to hear this, please share it with them, at least one person. And yes, go check out Shamani's work. And I can't wait to hear what you think about this episode. Any final, more than that, would you please say a 10-second, 30-second, 1 minute, however long, conclude our time together? I feel like it'd be really awesome to have you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we close with a mantra, actually? And again, mantra is sacred sound that
Hmm.
connects us to the divinity that is always within us. So I will chant a mantra that is really in service to the divine feminine in all embodiments. And we'll just close with that.
Hmm.
Feel free to tune in if this resonates with you, and just drop into your body, drop into your feet and your legs, all the way in to receive these vibrations. ॐ सर्वमङ्गलमङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी Narayani Namostute. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free. May all beings live with ease. Om Shanti.
Thank you for listening to the Compromise to Alchemize podcast. Really excited to thank Jessica from Lunalux for the music, this track called Major. I want to thank Toshi, who originally did the design work for my cover art. And then I also want to thank Alyssa from my team for podcast publishing, my whole team, including Kat, for heading up my world. And then also definitely want you all to follow me on YouTube, follow the podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcast. Comment, give us a rating, and also follow me on Instagram at Dr. Neil Bulchandani so you can stay tuned to my latest. Thanks so much, and you have an amazing day. This is major.